Hey CIV, welcome back to the CIV Podcast. We hope you've been enjoying the episodes so far. We have a couple episodes out, so make sure to check those out before you finish this episode. Maybe go right now, pause right now, go watch those episodes, and then come back to this new episode. But Alex and I have the privilege of interviewing Pastor Walter. So thank you for being here. We would want to just know a little bit about you and your faith journey as we have been these past couple episodes. So let's start off with what you do here at Church in the Valley. What is it that you do here?
Okay, well, for a total of 13 years in two different parts, I've been children's pastor here. In 2002 was my first job out of college. I was very nervous because there were no Adventist kids pastors I knew of. Oops. And so I'll kind of get to that journey a little bit. But then, so I did that for 3 years. That was in the old church building. Then I went to Michigan for my master's and then pastored there for about 6 years. And then I ended up coming back in 2014. And then been here since then, since 2024. So altogether 13 years. And I don't know very many pastors went back to the same church. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a little bit of a unique thing. And of course, they say you can never come home, you know, and I came home, like I knew a lot of especially the old time church members, stuff like that, but I was gone. And while I was gone, I was learning and growing, and then Church in the Valley and all the members were learning and growing. So you don't come back, your brain assumes you'll come back where you left off. Yeah. And so there was a thing like it was the same, but not the same. That was kind of a neat dynamic, but I definitely appreciated those relationships I already had established from before, and I was able to kind of pick up where you left off to a certain degree. Nice. And I like that more than just starting from zero, right?
Yeah. So what is being children's ministry pastor here at CIV entail? Like what is all of that?
So the main thing is what I would say, what my sermon is every week, right? I've been a senior pastor. I was in Michigan, senior pastor for 4 years. That's children's church. So that's especially for new families coming to church. The kids aren't used to sitting through church. They're not used to sitting through family worship or anything. And so it's very distracting for the parents to listen to the worship service. And so I really want to make your first week or your first month at CIV as easy as possible. Make sure that the parents are blessed in the adult service. Then also the kids are blessed. We don't want the kids to go home saying it was boring. I want the parents to go home yelling at their kids on the way home, like, I couldn't hear nothing. You guys were crawling all over the place. Yeah. And so that's really, children's church is really primarily for people who are new to church. And it's fine if Adventist families want to send their kids there, but I really see it as optional for like my children. Like you can go sit in the big church with your mom as well, right? And so that's my main thing. And then I also oversee and support all the regular, what I would say, Adventist children's ministries we have. So we have the different Sabbath school divisions, we have Pathfinders and Adventurers, and then the other thing, since 2017, we started a kids' own day camp. A little bit like a VBS, but also different. And then, of course, I oversee that.
Cool.
Yeah, that's good. So if you don't mind sharing with us, what brought you to go into ministry and like your SDA journey? What did that look like for you?
Okay, well, if it's okay, I'll kind of start my childhood. So I didn't grow up Adventist.
Okay.
I grew up in the SDA Reform movement. Okay. Meaning the Adventist church, this is the Adventist church in like World War I, World War II, had got too liberal. And there's a little thing there about Adventists serving in the military versus not serving at all. So like, Desmond Doss being a non-combatant, and then some members said, no, we don't want to serve at all. So there's a little bit of a breakup over in Europe between these two Adventist factions. And then the more traditional, the more, if you want to say old-fashioned one, was the Seventh-day Adventist Reform movement. So I grew up with that. Okay. So some of the stuff, for example, a lot of emphasis on Ellen White. King James Bible. So when I go back and I preach at my dad's house church, I redo my sermons. So it's less stories, take out the jokes, and use King James, And again, I want to be a blessing there. So I prefer more modern translations usually. I have no problem with the King James. But so that's kind of how I grew up. Women had to wear dresses, so no pants. Extremely limited makeup, no makeup at all. No short hair on the girls, etc. So that's how I grew up. So you basically take
walking red flag out.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
My wife wears jeans all the time. But so I grew up with that, right? And you also have to be a vegetarian.
Okay, yeah.
And of course,
cherry on top. Didn't make it.
And so I appreciate is very sincere, very dedicated people that you really appreciate. but I've also had to struggle a little bit with sarcasm. So my wife grew up, I would say, like quite balanced. And so if I have, like, I'll put like a little sarcastic Adventist joke about eating meat or long dresses or something, and like my wife won't get it. She's like, huh? And then someone who might have a background like me, they'll kind of get a little bit of that little unspoken, you know. But you know, it's easy to be critical of where you came from. I think it's very important. My parents were very sincere, and they were following God as best as they knew how, and they're very dedicated to their faith. And so that was always very important. And then my parents separated in grade 3. I went with my mom, and the church is extremely small in Canada. There's lots in Brazil. So there's only like one church building in Toronto, and it's like 30 or 40 members or something, right? So there's just a few people around Western Canada. And so there was no church to go to as a single mom with her 2 boys. And so then we just defaulted into the Adventist church. And so that's kind of how I became Adventist. And of course, I went to an Adventist school. I was sponsored. So I was very thankful for that because we didn't have much income. And my mom is Brazilian, but her education didn't count. So when they separated, my mom is like trying to be a waitress, doesn't work, putting herself through high school, putting herself through massage school, you know, between welfare and child support, etc. And so I appreciate that struggle my mom did. I also really appreciate Calgary Central SDA Church. They sponsored us. You know, when I see those kids getting sponsored to our summer camp here at church, or the way we help students at Fraser Valley, like that's a soft spot. Of course, 20 years ago or something, we started Single Moms Oil Change. That was a product of my growing up years.
Right.
And you know, well, what can we do to bless single moms in the community? Well, I know their cars aren't repaired very often. And so that's where our Single Moms Oil Change ministry started. So that's a little bit of my background. And then I would say a big turning point was, although I grew up in the church, I was what I would call the CIV rebel. I was the guy that skipped the camp meetings, stayed up till 2 a.m, causing trouble. And before my friends and I got into real trouble, I was 16. And instead of doing whatever else, I decided to go back and work on my dad's farm in Saskatchewan. I grew up in Alberta with my mom when they separated. My mom and the boys went to, her boys, myself and my older brother. And so then that really U-turned my life. Not that my mom wasn't spiritual, she was. It was almost spending 2 months with my father and reconnecting with him. And when I came back, the people at school were like, who are you? And what happened to Walter? like I was very lazy. Like I would disappear. We had to do like put away chairs after an assembly. I was like James Bond. I was invisible. And when I came back, you know, my dad, even though he made fun of school, he's like, oh, come on the farm. I'll teach you some real stuff, son. But we had worship every day, you know what I mean? And I was away from some of my friends who had been a bad influence and from, you know, the music I was listening to, the movies I was watching. And then when I came back, we'd be putting chairs away after assembly. And I'd be like, come on, guys, time is money, money is time. Let's stack those chairs. Remember my friend, he's now a surgeon, Travis, he actually stopped. He put his chairs down. I was like, who are you? And what have you done with Walter? And then other people also noticed, you know, spiritually, my girlfriend and I, we were dating over the summer. We were dating beforehand. We both went to Chinook Winds. And then we came back for the summer. She worked as a lifeguard at a pool. And she had been hanging out with that crowd and you know, going out drinking and whatever with them and just really not having a spiritual experience. And where we had landed at the end of the summer, we came back, she was kind of going down that road. Well, this Christian thing, this Adventist thing, this is really our parents' church, not really my church. And for me, I'd landed the opposite direction where like, well, if God is real, we should live like it, you know? Well, I never doubted God's existence, but it just like she never said, I've been thinking, I don't think God is real. It was like, this isn't my church, it's my parents' church. And then you know, we end up going both in a more spiritual direction. But growing up in an Adventist home, it's Sabbath keeping home, I should say, and then Adventist was important, and then I think that once I went with my dad was really important, and stuff. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, no, that's good. I have a question though, in terms of like, I think when you said, obviously when you came back and everyone was like, whoa, like this is such a shift, and everyone was doing their own thing, and you were probably in a different walk with God. How did you maintain those friendships though? Because I know like for some of us, it's hard to like have those friendships when your friends do the total opposite of what you're doing, right? And like you also don't want to like make them feel bad because like this is the way I'm going about my life. So what was that balance? What did that look like?
Well, one of the mixed blessings, I guess I would say, is my best friend that I got in a lot of trouble with. He had just moved down to Loma Linda. and then he was down there, and then he kept going on that same trajectory I was on. Like all the guys I was hanging out with, all the guys and girls I was hanging out with at camp meeting, right? Skipping all the spiritual meetings, hanging out in the forest, smoking pot, whatever. I'd never smoked pot, but I was around a lot of pot at camp meeting. I don't know if it's like that in BC. Well, it probably is, but I know when I was young, I saw a lot of weed at camp meeting. But they continued on that journey, but he actually moved away at the same time. And my other friends that were still at school weren't really on that trajectory. So I was kind of like I missed having my best friend move away, but it was automatically I didn't have that pull per se, right? And so so I would say once I U-turned with Dad, I was kind of one of the bad kids. And so when I came back around, like none of my classmates were really pulling me backwards. Right. Except my friend though came back the next summer. And again, remember, like he kept going on that trajectory. He was like, my first summer I bought this old antique truck. My first vehicle is this old classic Ford truck. And I came back and it's all like the old rims on it. And of course we wanted to have like those cool modern rims, right? And my friend's like, hey, listen, man, let's go jack up a truck and pull the tires off. Cause Calgary's a lot of alleys. So you just find a nice truck in an alley, lift it up, pull the tires off in the dark, and you got free rims. I was like, no. And I look back now, and that was a turning point. That's why that one summer I was a rebel before I could really get into bad stuff. Right. And then as things started to get more serious, God turned me just in time where now my friend that I was going parallel with, now he's saying, let's go steal tires off someone else's car. And like, that's some big stuff. Yeah. That's not like not that you should steal a chocolate bar, but stealing a chocolate bar is different than stealing tires off a car.
Yeah, 100%.
Way different.
Because you can go to jail for, I don't think.
Well, I was young enough to get away with it, but still.
I don't know.
Go to jail for stealing a chocolate bar.
Cool. I would just change the gears or change the wheels a little bit. Segue. We're working on the segues. What brought you to children's ministry specifically? I know you talked about some of your past and your upbringing and how your mother brought you up in the church also influenced that. But when you went to do your master's and you came back and you ended up at the same church, did you have an opportunity to serve in another ministry, or did you just decide to stay?
Yeah, no, I don't want to be a lead pastor. I was a lead pastor in Michigan for 4 years. Let me kind of backtrack a little bit. So even growing, like when I spent those 2 summers with my dad, or I'd go back to visit over Christmas, spring break, we'd go and visit the other farm families. We're in the middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan, right? Like the road ends at my dad's house. Like the road ends at his house. Okay. And so we'd visit. I know nothing against adults, but I remember even like when I was 16 or 17, like the kids would be like, hey, Walter, want to play with Legos? I was like, sure. And they'd have like, this cool 16-year-old playing Legos with them. And I wasn't like, oh, why would I play with, like, go away. I'm talking to the important people, right? And so I don't know why. I just kind of had that wiring in me. And then after 2 summers working with my dad, when I was 16, 17, I was 18, I had a full-time job working in a warehouse, could have made a bit more money. But I ended up working at Foothill Summer Camp. And then they had a really dynamic program there. And then that gave me some other opportunities to serve. Brian Walls, my youth pastor, he got we did some miming. I talk a lot, but I used to do a lot of miming. And that gave me an outlet. I was never the best at sports. Like I'm not super musical. I play guitar only because I'm stubborn and don't give up. Like I'm not naturally musical. Like Josh, I started Pastor Josh on guitar. And even when he was young, he outplayed me. Like I remember there was a time in children's church, he was just rocking the strings. And I looked at him and I was like, I don't need to be here. And I remember I walked off the stage and just let Josh J continue leading song service in children's church at the old building. When he was like 10 or 11 or something, could barely reach around the guitar. But the drama gave me something that I was naturally good at, and they gave me an outlet. Then at summer camp, I was able to do that. I was part of the spiritual programming team, and that really kind of connected, kind of like a kid who's naturally athletic. They start playing basketball, they're like, oh, I love this. And then they get that reinforced with other people saying, hey, you're good at this, right? And so there's definitely some of that. And I saw the kids, because we marketed to the general public, not just the church kids. And so you had kids who had never been to church come to summer camp, and they learned about God for the first time. And sometimes at the end of the week, they'd give their hearts to God. And even if they didn't give their hearts to God, they really enjoyed it. They were listening. It was relevant to them, right? It was connecting with them. And that really gave me a vision. And then where the children's ministry comes in is I actually had thought of being a professional mime, no joke, or I know it's funny.
Sorry, I didn't.
Hey, respect.
You know what? Like,
we respect
you never know. You could be also ministering to, like, through miming.
my ministry.
But it reaches people.
Yeah.
Like we've done, when I came here, we did an epic drama team. We were in San Francisco doing our mime drama dance thing on Pier 39, right? And what often happens, because I did this in high school for years, did it here for years, is someone will come up, be like, oh, who's in charge here? Oh yeah, you can't be doing this here, you know, and they kind of kick you off. You're like, oh, I'm sorry. And you always play dumb. You don't ask permission because they won't give it to you if you're a church group. You just kind of go, you get away with it for about an hour, and then they say you can't. Say, oh, I'm sorry. That's no problem, no problem. You're very cooperative, and you pack up and leave, right? That's the standard protocol. And so we were in Pier 39, and someone went over to, I think it was Chantel Jameson, and was like, oh, who's your leader, right? Because I also looked really young when I was my first time here. Why I grew the beard, actually, so people stopped thinking I was 17. But like over there pointing at him, and I saw it pointing at him, and I was like, oh goodness, here it comes. And some guy comes over like, you know, tats and rings and everything. And I was like, he doesn't look like he works for the city. But you're in San Fran, you never know, right? Maybe just like a really like cool city employee. And he came over, he's like, man, this stuff you guys are doing, this is really cool. Where are you guys from? You should come back. And there's a very powerful outreach through creative arts that you don't get with a sermon.
Right.
You know what I mean? Now, I've retired from drama ministry or mime because I see this kind of like a thing. If a church doesn't have a drama ministry, the church can be fine. If a church doesn't have a children's ministry, you're up a creek. Like, you need to have a children's ministry, and any church is more than 30 people. And so that's where I've focused in on children's ministry, where I kind of used to multitask between the two a little bit. But but the drama ministry was very influential in getting me excited about communicating the gospel. And it was neat. I'm always drawn to non-traditional things, to some innovative new thing. I'm not white as a manager or a maintainer. Like, don't hire me as your janitor. Nothing against janitors. Like, that's not me. I will bust my tail to start something new that should exist and doesn't exist. But then once it's up and running, then I have to keep reinventing and tweaking it, which is something I love about kids ministry, is we get to keep switching children's church around and try new things. With day camp, we switch it up, we try new things. If I was limited where I had to keep just kind of maintaining the same style of ministry, I get very bored very quickly, right? But so summer camp was very exciting, and then I went and I thought it was different things for careers, but it was fun teaching kids about Jesus and being part of a team. And then I volunteered in children's church, and it wasn't having that spiritual impact I saw at summer camp. The kids were having fun. It was cute. You know, we dressed up with pigtails and freckles, and we dressed up like big kids kind of, and we'd talk about all sorts of different topics, like 10 Commandments and the gospel and this. It wasn't like a unified message. It's really being deliberate about helping the children grow spiritually. We're just teaching cool Bible stuff, and it's not the same. And so then, as I shared on the stage a couple of weeks ago, I went to my summer camp director and said, I feel God's calling me to do something different with children's church next. Is my second year of college, actually my third year of college, I think. And, but I don't know what. And then I didn't know Pastor Todd, the program we did at summer camp, he didn't make up. He got that program from a place called Metro Ministries in Brooklyn, New York, and they're a children's church, and they're all over the world. They minister like, I don't even know now. It's like 150,000 kids around the world, 20,000 in New York, and they always go after the kids in the toughest neighborhoods, right? And they do something they call Sidewalk Sunday School, but they have a really dynamic program. And so they copied that strategy, techniques, flavor, whatever you want to call it, style of ministry from there, and put it into a summer camp. And then I was wondering, what should I do in church? And I was like, just do what we do at camp, like take it back into church. And then that's kind of been my career ever since then, because I saw it work. The parents would come to me and they're like, I don't know what you're doing in children's church. Actually, I wish they would come visit so they did know. They say, like, my kid was bored coming to church. Now they're running across the parking lot, I used to struggle to get them out of bed. Now they're getting up, combing their hair, they're up early. They're excited about church, etc. So that gave me kind of the way mime did, but on a more central area, that gave me this, I'm actually good at this, because I wasn't really good at the other things, that other people were good at. And then I saw the impact, and I saw that it was rare, that there wasn't a lot of good children's churches around. And so that kind of gave me like a bit of an anchor point of like, I could actually do this. And then I really struggled whether to do ministry or medicine. And so everybody was telling me to go into medicine, right? My science major friends were telling me to go into medicine. The science professors telling me to go into medicine. My mom, who's a PK, was telling me to go into medicine. My theology major friends were telling me to go into medicine.
Whoa.
But I really wrestled with it because, I had my pre-med, I had my MCAT and stuff like that, and I really struggled. And finally, for me, what it came down to, I wasn't willing to go, quote, take the easy road into medicine and then doubt whether I followed God's call or not. And then that was kind of, that was another anchor point for me where I'll take the risk. So my deal with God was, okay, God, this job does not exist. I don't want to be a regular pastor, right? I was like doing different, innovative things. I'm not going to apply to medical school. I'm just going to pray. I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket. This is after years of struggle, talking with my mentors and wrestling with it. And then finally, I put the eggs in one basket. And then I jumped. And then before our job interviews, we normally get interviewed, I think like end of January, beginning of February. I actually got hired by Aldergrove SDA Church. I didn't even know who Pastor Dave was. I thought my camp director was going to hire me because he became a pastor in St. Albert near Edmonton. So that was the job I thought I was going to get. But my children's church mentor stayed. He went pre-med theology like I did. He was a couple years ahead of me. Then he went to medical school at the University of Alberta. So Pastor Todd got a free children's pastor with the students. So he hired a youth pastor also from summer camp. So that job vaporized. So that I didn't know where I was going to go. But then I didn't know Pastor Dave existed. And then Pastor Dave, Aldergrove SDA Church, Dan Jackson was the president here. Then they hired me before my job interviews. And for me, that was just like a real strong confirmation of God saying, okay, if you're actually gonna follow when I call you and jump off the diving board when there's no water in the pool, I'm gonna put water in the pool for you. And so now we're jumping off the diving board again, and people are like, wow, that's so much faith. And I was talking to someone, I had a Bible study this week, because it was like, man, Walter, this is like all faith. I kind of felt bad. I was like, it actually isn't. In the past, it's been all faith. Like God's called me to do leaps of faith like this before, and I would say this is the least risky one I'm doing. Right? Or like that felt way riskier to me.
Right.
But I've also seen God follow through multiple times, and I was like, okay, pray about it, confirm it, pull the trigger. And then the day we pulled the trigger, my brother's looking at my wife, because we don't have a solid job after this, right? Like we're going out into the great unknown, etc. You don't have your secured salary. Let me put it that way. And my brother looked at my wife and said, aren't you nervous? And my brother's an atheist now. And she's like, no. And I was like, here we go. So anyhow, that's a little bit of the medicine versus ministry. It looked like I switched after 2 years, but my heart hadn't switched yet. I was doing theology classes, but I was still really, and then finally I said, okay, I don't want to have this doubt for the rest of my life. I'll have, the 3-car garage and the Beamer, but kind of always doubt, did I really do what God called me to do? I wasn't willing to do that risk.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I ended up being a pastor. But then God got me a job before I even interviewed.
Wow, that's crazy.
That's crazy you say that, even when you were just saying that someone was telling you, like, isn't it scary? And I think about that because I think when you do it, like... You're almost there. You can do it. But this is not the first time you've jumped into something, and when you do it with full heart, it doesn't become like a scary thing anymore. I think that's probably what you're saying. Like, it's not scary anymore to do something like that.
It's not scary because I know.
Right.
I know. No. There's a theoretical I know versus I know. God will put water in the pool.
Right.
But sorry.
No, that's okay.
Take your time.
So and God's done this as well. Can I share a couple other jumps?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so the first big jump for me, well, of course, the first thing was surrendering to God. Right, so I wanted to get baptized when I was young. The spirit was willing, the flesh was weak. I was hanging with my friend, the one who wants to steal car tires. So I remember I went up, I got baptized, but then I was just not living. I was stealing things. We would go around at night and rip hood car symbols off. And stuff. Anyhow, I was not being a good boy when I was 15. But we're just doing shoplifting, stealing, vandalizing stuff, causing trouble for no reason. And then the summer with my dad, then kind of U-turned. But then I came back. I got rebaptized at age 18. Brian Wall baptized me in the Bow River in Calgary. And I don't encourage rebaptisms, but for me, I really hadn't been walking with the Lord for several years. It wasn't like I made a mistake. It's like my whole lifestyle, my direction was not there. And so there was that line. It was at a youth retreat in Alberta. It was that line in the sand where I walked up to the front, traditional altar call, right? I walked to the front and said, God, I'm all yours. And anything that gets between me and you, like my girlfriend, I have a girlfriend that's pulling me away from you, I'm going to break up with her. My career, my school, my hobbies, like 100%. It's either 100% or nothing, right? And so that was really that line in the sand. And then God called me on that. But then it's like, oh, theory is becoming reality now, right? So the first jump was not applying. When I decided I'm not applying to medical school, I'm going this way. And then there's that anxiety, right? Like I'm human, I feel the anxiety. And then God covered that. Then when I was in seminary, I was talking with the BC conference a little bit, and they were like, well, we know you're a real passionate about children's ministry. We don't really have an opening for you per se. We don't want to just put you into a regular pastoral job. So, if you find another thing that's interesting to you, kind of go for it or whatever. And then we'd talked a little bit about the church plant in Squamish that Pastor Rob Falkenberg is doing. So because I'm a rock climber, snowboarder, that's my culture. I'm from Western Canada, right? Love rock climbing, love snowboarding, right? Backcountry camping, go make a snow cave on the backside of the mountain, sleeping it 5 days. Like I love that stuff. And so then we were talking about doing that church plant. I was like, yeah, like I'm going to get paid to go snowboard. I'm going to get a season's pass at Whistler. And, that's a ministry deduction. That's tax deductible for me. I was like, yeah. And I was like vibrating for me. But at first I was thinking, well, that's a young adult ministry. I'm a children's pastor. And then I talked with one of my mentors, Ron Whitehead, the Oshkosh Pathfinder director. And he said, Walter, start with a Christian daycare. And then build off the Christian daycare in the community, doing children's ministry, and then build your church off of that. And so I was like, I'm going to have my cake and eat it too. And I was just like, yeah. And then I was, the ministry in Benton Harbor was kind of an inner city kids ministry. My first week over there, I visited it, hated it. It was so disorganized, chaotic. I was like, I'm never going back there again. My roommate was volunteer there, tried to recruit me. I'm like, no, I don't go there. There was no plan or structure when I went there. I was embarrassed to pull these kids into church and bore them to death. And the kids were looking at me like, you tricked me. Because, I invited them to church, right? But long story short, I am kind of going back and trying to empower and train the people. I was taking them to Chicago to be trained in children's ministry, the inner city kids ministry there. And I was there with a college student who's going to be there as a future leader. I'm leaving for Squamish and Whistler, in whatever, 8 months from now, right? And I got a full-time job there. My wife has a full-time job teaching online, and everything was working out perfect. And then I just felt God kind of grab me by the throat and say, Walter, I want you to stay in Benton Harbor. And I'm like, Jesus, I hate Michigan. I'm a white kid from the farm in Saskatchewan. Like I haven't been around inner city culture environment. Like all I know is from the movies, right? Which is not accurate research. Jesus is a horrible leader. There's no job here. I got 2 jobs over there. So then that was the second call. I was like, that's obnoxious. It's kind of like the widow who has her son, then her son dies. It's kind of like God gave me a dream job, and he's taking it away. And when I talk to people are like, no, don't do that. That's a bad, it's like college. That's a bad idea. You're not ordained yet. You're going to be married. Sarah and I were serious, right? You're going to be married. You got to take care of your family. You want a safe place to raise your kids, all this stuff. And especially pastors were the number ones who told me not to because I wasn't ordained yet, right? And I just remember thinking, like, what would John the Baptist do? Like, would John the Baptist wait to be ordained and then do something crazy for Jesus? And just the reasons I was getting for no were all like more career convenience focused. They weren't following Jesus, living out the New Testament, if I can say that, right? And again, not trying to be critical of pastors. I'm just saying pastors are the most, we're like plumbers were like, yeah, that sounds cool. And stuff. So we prayed about it. I think it was 2 months. Sarah and I both sought God in prayer with that. And then I called BC Conference and said, hey, we'd talked a little bit. You said, you don't really have a job for me necessarily. There was this theoretical thing up in Squamish, but I think God's calling me to stay here in Michigan. And they're like, okay, check you later. And so then we got married in June. We moved into the hood in August. got our apartment rented, neither of us had a job.
Wow.
So we talk about risk, and all we had was Sarah's savings. She worked. She graduated 1 year before me. I graduated with my master's, and she graduated the previous year and worked as a teacher, right? But in Michigan, she could save money. So we moved in there, started spending money. Then Sarah got hired in September, and then I got picked up a little bit after that, several months after that. And then we were also on a partial salary, and so that was more nerve-wracking. And actually the worst one for me, I think the college one was hard for me. Then later on, I got picked up as a half-time senior pastor on a 43% wages. And then I was a volunteer children's pastor. So we ran children's church in the afternoon because I couldn't do two things at once, right? And then both ministries grew, and then I hired one of my assistants to lead the children's church, but it wasn't his main area of giftedness, and I focused on the senior pastor and, had that Protestant, Walt Disney, as long as you try hard enough, you can do anything. Well, that's not true. So then when I focused on being the senior pastor, I just didn't have a vision. Like I could do it. I could preach the sermons. I could do the board meetings. I could do the admin. But then I remember there were just these times like I don't know where to lead the church. So looking to me for leadership, I know where to lead the kids ministry. I got vision for that. Like what direction? Because I tried that, didn't work, tried that, didn't work, and I'm like, I don't. And so then I resigned that, and that had a half salary with it. Now we had got a wealthy donor, and so that became a full salary, and then it had kind of a 2/3 salary for my assistant. So I actually resigned being the senior pastor, hired my boss, who had been one of our best volunteers previously, Pastor Taurus Montgomery, great guy. He actually just retired from there this year. And then I stepped down to be the children's pastor. But that was probably the scariest because I had kids to feed, and I had no secure salary there, and I had no real investments to speak of. And I remember that I was nervous. I remember I was almost crying at the meeting where they're like, all right, and so you want to change jobs and you're willing to take that salary instead of that salary, right? And this is like a local hire, no guaranteed benefits or whatever. And I was like, yes. And I remember the image in my mind was my kids, right? My two kids. And then we were driving home. My wife didn't say very much. I'm trying to cry, but I didn't shop at Aldi's, a discount store. I'm going to cry a little bit. I hope you have some Kleenex. But my wife was driving. I just remember just feeling that anxiety. And my wife didn't say nothing. And instead of going to the Myers or the Walmart, which is already pretty cheap, she went to the cheap grocery store, the one that you'd kind of make fun of. And we just drove there and went shopping. And that was just I don't know, it just meant a lot to me. My wife was like, I'm in it with you, And so yeah, but God provided there. And then when that happened, then I felt like a fish swimming in water. A crocodile can walk on land, but when they're in the water, and my assistant, when I was actually doing both jobs, I remember she called me out. She was kind of trying to help me see some vision for this. I think she was a PK trying to help me see some vision for the main church service. I was kind of struggling with that, and then in the afternoon would go out and do the outreach with the kids. And she's like, she was the kind of person that she was willing to offend me, in a good way. She's like, Walter, you're not a senior pastor, you're a kids pastor. You walk different in the afternoon. When we're here doing kids ministry, you walk different. And I was like, she's like, listen, let's make church a kids program. I'll dress up as Queen Esther. We can rock this thing. But I knew I couldn't. My church board wouldn't allow that. They wanted to have a quote real church in the morning and stuff. But it was the right thing to do. And so again, I quit being a pastor again, right? I went as a local hire. I still wasn't ordained, etc. And so again, what would John the Baptist do? And so that's why this time around, I'm already ordained. They actually ordained me while I was a local hire. The Michigan Conference, one of the most conservative conferences in North America, ordained me as I was a local hire, and I wasn't doing traditional prophecy seminars. They're like all their pastors, they won't ordain a youth pastor. You can be a youth pastor PMC, they won't ordain you. You have to be like a senior pastor doing prophecy seminars. And I guess I had been a senior pastor for a few years. But anyhow, they did ordain me there. And so that's why with this one here, I'm already ordained. I was blessed to buy a house 10 years ago. My house has tripled in value. We just sold it this week. And so I don't want to dip into my savings, but I'm not going hungry. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's other people like, whoa, this is a huge risk. I'm like, no, the other three ones were definitely worse. And so not saying it is a risk, it is a sacrifice, but in my heart, the other ones were a lot scarier. And that's why this one also, I have a lot more trust because I already know if I've prayed through this, I've sought God's wisdom, I just know God's going to provide for us. whatever that looks like.
Yeah. For our viewers who are listening, if you guys don't know, Pastor Walter is moving on from his ministry here at CIV.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are so many people out there who are so grateful for what you do. I know, like, just from hearing your story, like, I remember what it was like to go to summer camp and to experience that 1 week of what church could be like, and just being on this spiritual high, and then going home and then going back to church and being like, well, what is this? Like, what was that week for if I'm just going to come back to just see this? So if I'm imagining what kids church was, because I actually haven't gone up there since I've moved here. If I imagine it as summer camp every single Sabbath, whew,
Yeah.
imagine what church would be like every week. That'd be crazy. So, there's a lot of people that are so grateful, and we're so grateful for your ministry here, and we honestly can't wait to see what's next for you. So, if you can, we'd love to know a bit of what that looks like, about your next steps, for what your future is and what you are.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So there's a lot of details behind the scenes have to be worked out still, right? So I always got to say that there's a lot of things we can't work out until I made the announcement up front. So the long story short, long story medium, I would say, is one of the reasons I came back to Canada was in 2014, my brother became an atheist. I didn't even know he was spiritually struggling. And so just my mom called me crying on the phone, like, Willie doesn't believe in Jesus anymore. I'm like, what do you mean? Because, we grew up in the church. I just assumed we'd both be Christians our whole lives, right? And I wouldn't say he was ever like a super passionate follower, but like he had family worship with his kids. He was in church regularly and stuff like that. And so there's a little bit of a pain file that, one of the frustrations for me is like, hey man, like I have a science background. My brother and I both love science. I have a science background. I'm a trained theologian. Like, it's my job to help people with their doubts and their faith challenges, right? And like we talked about, I guess we don't talk enough, but it's always been a little bit of a pain file for me, and not being able to have those conversations with my brother, at least try and answer his questions before, because once he jumped ship, it's like trying to put people back together after they break up is a lot easier to help them reconcile beforehand. And so I already had a strong interest in science my whole time. That's why I was a science major. And I've always kind of kept, I read the science news, National Geographic and whatever. In Google News, there's a whole science section I'm always checking up on and whatever. And then I've done some different apologetic sermons. I did, we were in Hawaii, the pastoral students, we did a practicum in Hawaii. It was very rough. I got paid to go to Hawaii. Very stressful, very difficult, snorkeling and stuff. There were sea turtles. The sea turtles were very scary in Hawaii. But we were there. We all wrote part of the sermon. We did like our own prophecy seminar kind of thing. And I wrote the one on creation evolution. And my professor, who was like, well seasoned, he could have been retired a few years early. He was like, that was the best sermon I ever heard on that. I was like, oh, thank you. So it was out of interest, and that's growing stronger. My brother becoming an atheist, and then one of the callings I had was I felt God calling me, hey Walter, you're sad you never got a chance to talk to your brother before he left the ship, but in a church of this size, you have Williams in your audience. There's going to be someone in your audience who's not going to be a Christian in 6 months. Speak to them. So this is 2019, January. And so I did. I just openly shared. I called my brother first, got permission, and I want to accurately report his point of view. So I double checked his quotes, his feelings, what his critiques were of the faith, and I just shared. I thought I was going to make the church mad. I come to church to learn about Jesus, not atheism, and they didn't. You guys demanded more. I was like, okay, so that became a sermon series. And then I took that sermon series. I already had some apologetics in my week of prayer, and then I basically did like a week of prayer just on apologetics. And then the kids really responded to that. I think part of it is it's unique. I think every Christian should have a crash course in apologetics. Most of the time we should speak about what the Bible says. We should do that like 95% of the time. But I think 5% of the time we should talk about why is the Bible true, which I think other than prophecy, as Adventists, we do not cover that much, because the stuff I've learned that I just find amazing is like, I never knew this. Why didn't I learn this in high school? And so I started doing that. I did that here. It was very well received. Started doing that in high schools, like Chinook Winds, Okanagan Christian School, etc. And then had really positive feedback there. Again, it's something unique. It's something that's different, something that's innovative, right? And again, not every week of prayer should be apologetics, but having that one apologetics week of prayer has really clicked. But now the conflict is I'm away from my family. So I try to mitigate that some. I take one child with me, was good. And actually, one of my friends, I don't know, can I share Pastor Abraham? Okay, so Pastor Abraham, a good friend, he's quite a bit younger than me, but he's kind of become a bit of a mentor to me, which I appreciate. He kind of pulled me aside and just kind of like as a friend to a friend, he's like, Walter, I just feel God's leading me just to talk to you. I think you're traveling too much. I think you got to focus in on your family here. You know, and interesting, one of my initial reactions was, but doing this apologetics week of prayer is my purpose, was one thing. You know, it's part of my purpose, right? But there was like this, but this is so important. But then it's like, yes, I do need to prioritize my family, but there's a conflict. And then, you know, the other thing too, and I want to be careful how I say this because I love doing children's church. I've had a lot of fun doing it. I have been doing it for 25 years though, you know what I mean? And I've been able to reinvent it. We've been able to write our own curriculum and stuff like that. But there is a point where it's like, okay, you've been a teacher for 25 years. You're going to be ready. You might be ready to do something else. And some people stay a teacher. So I still want to work with young people, but I kind of feel like, you know what? It's becoming that season where it's a good time to maybe transition, let a younger generation run children's church, you know, and they're going to do it different and they're going to do a more modern style and they're going to reach, it's easier to reach the young culture. They're closer to it, right? And so there's part of me too, I want to get out of the way for a young leader to rise up as well. But I think the older generation has to be sensitive too. We shouldn't just hold on. We can get territorial. And we need to be careful with that. So that's a little bit of the journey there of trying to have more time with family. This apologetics, don't want to do a PhD. I thought I would do a PhD, but I'm not willing to sacrifice that time with my family. And then we've also discovered we just love traveling together. Took my kids to Brazil 2 Christmases ago. Then we went to Hawaii here in November and we're like, okay, yeah, let's do this. And so it's kind of mixing those variables together. So we're very excited. We've really loved serving at Church in the Valley. It's been a real blessing. And, you know, definitely, I don't want to give the impression I'm tired of doing children's church. I'm not. It's a wonderful ministry. But I do think it's time to let the younger generation take over. And I see some of that. I'm still a really good storyteller, but I see the way the young people, like, you know, the 16 to 24-year-olds, they'll relate to the young kids. They'll mention a video game or something like that, a cultural reference. Like, I just don't care what the latest video game is or the latest song. Like, I don't follow the new music. I just don't care. I'm 45. And they're definitely, you kind of sense that. They're able to relate in this way that's just natural and healthy and wonderful, you know? Where I'm becoming more of that older father. People starting to refer to me as sir and stuff. So yeah, I think now's the right time.
That's beautiful. That's also very touching because Ryan and I just came back from Expo and like just knowing that like the older people do want to see us succeed, you know what I mean? And it's beautiful too that you're wanting to take that risk. You don't know also what's to come. I mean, obviously for you, you're like, I've done this before, I can do that. But what advice would you give to someone who's in that stage that like at your age you did it and now you're doing it again at 45? Like you can take a risk at any age. Like what advice do you give to somebody who's struggling with that? Like, what do I do?
I would say read the New Testament. Step number 1 is give your heart totally to God. And that's, I mean, you know, you keep doing that every day, right? And definitely I still have to surrender, etc. But there's that line in the sand when I was 18. I backwalked my one when I was 13. When I was 18, I put that line in the sand, and that's been my anchor, that faith commitment. Because sometimes I don't feel like following God, to be blunt. Sometimes I get mad at my wife. But, you know, I said those vows to my wife, and I intend to keep them. I said that vow to God, I intend to keep it. So the first thing I think is if God is real, you can trust him to, quote, ruin your life. And sometimes we're scared. It's like, wow, do I really want to commit to God? What if he like ruins my career? Let him ruin your career. Wow. What if he asked me to break up with my boyfriend or girlfriend? Let him break you up.
Yeah.
Like if he is the God we see, through Jesus in the New Testament, you can 100% trust him. And that's scary. Like, he ruined all his disciples' lives. Like, they were like fishermen, tax collectors. Tax collector had it made, right? A Pharisee, like Saul had it made, man. He had all the cred. He had the nice house. He had the respect of his community. Then he's getting like beat up, almost stoned to death, shipwrecked, bitten by snakes, gets his head cut off. And the thing is, like, and we don't want our heads cut off. And even to the young pastors, I'd say, if God's really called you, follow his calling, even if it means ruining your pastoral career. Again, I'm on round 3, right? And I don't think this will ruin my career, but I'm willing to ruin my career to follow God's call. Right. And what I found is that, keep a humble attitude about it. Don't be like, oh, I'm so great, I quit my job. No, don't do that. If God calls you, though, be willing to ruin your life for God. Stay humble. Stay chill. Don't think you're better than anybody else, because other people did the traditional route to be a senior pastor under the Adventist church. God bless them. There's nothing wrong with that, right? There's John the Baptist, and there's Saul of Tarsus, and there's Matthew the tax collector. They all had different callings, and they all had their own armor, their own style. And so the number one thing I would say, the step one is really give your heart 100% to Jesus. Until you've done that, it's kind of like, you can't sort of be in the army. Like you're in the army and there's a war, you're going to war, And so, sign up for Team Jesus 100% and explicitly give God permission to ruin your life. And when you give God that freedom, that's where you can do something crazy with you. And I don't regret, there's times where I'm tempted, because my friend, we were in pre-med, we were in high school together, and we went into pre-med together, we were roommates, and he was 2 out of 3 tests, he'd get number 1, and then I'd beat him. And we were there. So I know I could be in his position. He's head of trauma in this significant hospital in the US. He makes so much money, he has to buy extra houses to throw his money into. I do not have that struggle, okay? I know, as a pastor or teacher, you're like, I would just like to pay for my house. And so there has been these moments of weakness where you're jealous. You're like, dude, I could be struggling with too much money right now, especially when I am struggling. I want to buy a house with 2 toilets, The funny thing is I'm in a motorhome now, still 1 toilet. But I'm buying a camper to tow behind it with a 2nd toilet. I'm getting my 2 toilets. But, God recycles. And so take the risk, let God ruin your life. For example, I gave my rock climbing ministry in Squamish, but then God brought me back here. And one of the first things I did a few months in, I was making a rock climbing wall in our church. And one of the major features in our summer camp is rock climbing, right? And so I'm introducing all these kids to my passion for the sport of rock climbing. And so God brought back my rock climb. It's actually on my business card. I'm the only rock climbing pastor. I worked so hard on the rock wall, I gave myself the title, no vote or permission needed.
There you go.
Respect.
If you're going to fire me, you're going to have to fire me. That's staying on the card. But God has recycled that back around, I just kind of thought of that because I'm finally getting 2 toilets. Just one is going to be in the camper behind the motorhome.
Hey.
It's going to be my office, my portable office, right? But yeah, and then the other thing I would say is, I guess, give your heart 100% to God. Give God permission to ruin your life. You want to have a New Testament testimony, be willing to take a New Testament risk. We're so safe, and safe translates to boring. And you see that. We're not in a natural environment. We're so prosperous in our modern Western society that our blessings have become our curse, and we can be so spiritually lukewarm. And then you visit someplace has more poverty. Even you visit the hood. And I went to the hood thinking I had a lot of solutions. I went there and I saw the faith that people have, where they're really relying on God to give them their daily bread.
Yeah.
Right? I was whining about I didn't have food in the house, and I had one of my young African-American friends was in my house, and he opened up my drawer, and it's just full of staples. When I say I don't have food, I mean I'm running out of fresh fruit and vegetables and low on milk. And he's like looking at me, like, you got food. And God might call you to be rich and successful. Great. Donate to people like me, please, because we need your donations. And if God calls you to poverty, you just need a bed and food.
Yeah.
Literally, every time you go to camp meeting, you're so happy at camp meeting, you're living in a tent with a sleeping bag on a mattress, getting bit by mosquitoes. And look how happy people are. You don't need the middle class dream. In America, I'd say the American dream, but in Canada, I would say middle class dream. You don't need the white picket fence. I've had that dream the last 10 years, praise the Lord, but I don't need that. That's optional. And I would say your career too. Go, if you want to have a radical life, be radically committed to Christ and take those risks, and that's how you get those exciting testimonies. You know, go serve on a mission trip. Don't go as you're the solution, but go do stuff. Do stuff international. Open yourself wide open, and that's where you're going to have, when you're 80 years old, one of the key regrets people who are 80 regret is not taking enough risks. They didn't start their own business. They didn't know that other guy was going after the girl that they liked, and they didn't take that chance to, you know, what's the worst thing that'll happen? Like right now, the worst thing that'll happen is I'm going to lose like $100,000 on my RV and stuff like that. And I won't ever be able to afford to live in BC, which isn't a small thing. But Michigan is still $150,000 for a house. I can, you know, I lived there before.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm never staying in Michigan, you know. But yeah, also don't say never. I never married a stereotypical pastor's wife. I got a long hair, piano playing, pastor's kid teacher for a wife, and she's wonderful. I said I'd never live in Michigan. Lived in Michigan for like 9 years. You know, so don't say never either. So now I'm careful. Like I'll be like, oh man, no.
Yeah, no. One of the things that we learned at Expo in Orlando was like today's day and age, we've found a way to make a relationship with Christ boring
and safe.
And safe. So I really commend you on taking that leap of faith, and I hope that this inspires anyone out there who's wanting to take that to take that risk and to start a new journey with Christ and to build a new testimony, because ultimately that's what we want to do while we're here, right? I don't want to live a boring life with Christ. Like if we know someone as awesome as Christ, like why is it boring? It shouldn't be. Yeah,
and if it is boring, you're the problem. You know, it's kind of like if someone has fights with everybody else, they're the problem, not everybody else.
Yeah.
And you look at Jesus is not boring at all. And if you're bored and you think you're following Jesus, but you're bored, you're the problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, one thing I will say with that, with the risk, is make sure you're praying through it, right? Like when I've sought wisdom and disagreed with wisdom, I've done that on the confidence I've surrendered it to Christ. I have sought godly counsel from a variety of sources, and I've dedicated it to God in prayer. And I love the story of the Hezekiah prayer. Like before I moved back here, we wrote down the pros and cons of staying in Michigan, the pros and cons of coming back here to BC, you know, and then we put a number on how high each priority was, like having a full salary, for example, being able to do children's ministry, etc., being close to family, and we put that on a piece of paper, and then that was kind of a logical process. It was good to process it logically. Then we put the piece of paper on the floor, surrendered to God, and said, God, do you want us to move back to BC? If you want us to stay here in Michigan, we're willing to be further away from our family, not have a stable, full salary, etc. If you're calling us here, we give you permission to ruin our lives. And you know, the standard, I would say, at least before a major leap of faith, I'd say at least a month of prayer and reflection, you know. But I would say don't do 4 years like I did in college. That eats on you. That gets old after a while. But you know, 1 or 2 months of prayer, seeking wisdom, and don't be scared to disagree with the counsel you get, but make sure you listen to it and engage with it. So
that's good. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Hopefully a year into what you're doing, we'll come back onto our podcast and you'll share what that's looked like, you know.
Would love to. Would love to. If you want to do it during the rainy season, I'm happy to do it from the sunny southern U.S. People are like, when are you going to leave? I'm like, well, I won't be here for the next rainy season. But I'm going to be here for several months still. There's a lot of work to do behind the scenes. So.
No, that's incredible too, I think, for our day and age, like that encouragement to just like take risks and whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to be ministry. It could be our career and how we minister in that type of area. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing and thank you for being vulnerable. We really appreciate that, and all the best to what God is calling you, I think.
Well, thank you for having me. This is my first podcast.
Well.
And I watch podcasts. You know, the guys have the big mics. They do this interview like this. I was like,
I did it.
Yeah, I'm like,
I made it.
I'm one of those guys now. But yeah, it's so neat that people can listen to this wherever they want. And it's also they get to hear the different stories. I love you guys doing these faith journeys because everyone's different and God speaks through different personalities, you know. And this podcast, maybe hearing me talk isn't going to click with someone, but someone else, maybe another podcast didn't click with them and this one will click with them, right? And so I just really hope that the way God's led me imperfect though I am, we didn't get into all the imperfections. I have lots of imperfections. That this will kind of click with someone else. But yeah, give God permission to ruin your life. That'd be my closing statement. And thanks for having me.
Cool. Yeah, that's probably going to be the title of this podcast. So
That's good.
don't forget to check out the rest of our episodes. Like, subscribe, follow us on Instagram stay for updates. I don't know when this episode's going to come out, probably a little later, but me and Alex just came back from EXO. We're starting to start a mini series on our Instagram and Reels about our highlights from Expo. But again, we're so grateful for you, Pastor Walter. So thank you for being here, and thank you, listeners, for being here, for listening. Stick around. We'll see you guys next time.